Moving on, Israel began selling arms to China way before the two countries established formal diplomatic ties in 1992. But after repeated run-ins with Washington over Israeli transfers to China, Israel essentially ceded to the U.S. veto rights over frontline exports to Beijing. So now, instead, Israel is offering up critical infrastructure projects as a way to get closer to China. But even this could prompt blowback from Israel's #1 patron and ally in Washington. Here's my report on the perilous straits Israel is forced to navigate between the Chinese rock and the American hard place. Let's watch.
Great to be with.
Israel's alliance with Washington has never left it much maneuvering room for cultivating the strategic and diplomatic influence it seeks with Beijing.
And we in Israel are eager to share with China the fruits of this technology, science and technology, that can better the lives of all of humanity and of our two peoples.
Given the growing great power competition between the two, Israel is caught between a Chinese rock and an American hard place.
They do not want me or us to win because I am the first president ever to challenge China on trade.
Beijing is pursuing a comprehensive and coordinated campaign to undermine support for the president,
as it aims to get closer to one without alienating the other. Repeated run-ins with Washington preclude Israel from providing what Beijing really wants: advanced manned and unmanned aircraft, tracking radars, precision missiles, and other fruits of Israel's defense and aerospace industry. In 1992, the year Israel and China established formal diplomatic ties, the George H.W. Bush administration accused Israel of transferring U.S. Patriot technology to China.
These reports are unfounded, but there's no question that there's a deliberate campaign here to besmirch Israel. I have no idea who is behind them. I only know that the attempt here is to undermine American-Israeli relations.
2 years later, American fingers pointed to the eerie resemblance between the Israeli-developed U.S.-funded Lavi and China's then frontline J-10 fighter bomber. But it wasn't until the following decade that Israel's #1 ally and patron seriously started flexing its muscle. In July 2000, Ehud Barak canceled a $1 billion sale of Falcon early warning aircraft to China, paying a painful $300 million in penalties in the process.
The United States does not support the sale of this type of technology to Taiwan, to China rather, because of the potential of changing the strategic balance in that region.
And 5 years later, following yet another crisis of confidence that almost saw Israel booted out of participation in the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, Israel acceded to U.S. demands for prior consultation, effective veto rights on arms sales deemed threatening to U.S. national interests. With all but the most benign defensive and homeland security exports off the table, Israel and China have found a way to get closer to their mutual benefit. Israel is encouraging People's Republic of China-owned industries to assume a growing role in upgrading its critical infrastructure. But this, too, could pose problems for the U.S.-Israel alliance.
How will the U.S. Navy react to Chinese fleet or Chinese ships in the Eastern Mediterranean?
It would be, delusional on our part to not think, as their economic interests grew, that they would just sit back and say, well, the U.S. Navy, you're kind of the global guys, why don't you go do it? I mean, that's just not the way it will work.
In 2014, China's PMEC, the Pan-Mediterranean Engineering Company, won an international bid to build and operate a southern port in Ashdod, near Israel's second-largest Navy base. The following year, Israel again awarded another Chinese firm rights to operate a sprawling new port planned for Haifa Bay, adjacent to Israeli Navy headquarters. But the prospect of China having such access to and control of Israel's two key ports has raised eyebrows in the U.S. and here in Israel.
China will make economic inroads that will be followed, I believe, by an increasing naval presence and capability and activity along this maritime Silk Road that extends from the East Asian littoral, South China Sea, Indian Ocean, to the Red Sea, with branches down into East Africa, and then also up into the Mediterranean.
Meanwhile, Israel and China are progressing with plans for a high-speed rail linking Israel's southern Red Sea port of Eilat with Ashdod on the Mediterranean. The estimated $10 billion Red Med Railway is part of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative for a new route, in addition to the Suez Canal, for connecting China with Europe via Asia and the Middle East.
With trains that go above ground, underground, railways, highways, and eventually we are talking about connectivity, that physical connectivity that is the way of the future.
Will China's growing foothold here prompt blowback from Washington? Could China's reputed cyber and espionage skills deter the U.S. Navy from Israeli port calls? And here's another cause for concern. That bullet train for transporting Chinese goods from the Red to the Med passes straight through Israel's cyber capital of Beersheba, a high-tech oasis in the desert that will soon host the nation's elite intelligence units, cybersecurity branches, and supporting research and development.
Now from Washington, I'm joined by Shoshana Bryan, a longtime Washington foreign policy expert who spent years assessing this uneasy triangle of conflicting U.S., Israeli, and Chinese interests. So, Shoshana, should Israel expect blowback from Washington from its new infrastructure-focused approach to better ties with Beijing?
The answer is yes on both counts. The United States has become very aware of Chinese espionage capabilities and desires. We have suddenly discovered Chinese bugs in hardware that they send to the United States, as well as software and as well as spy capabilities. So yes, the United States at the moment is very cognizant of Chinese espionage capabilities.
And will China's growing footprint here, especially adjacent to key Israeli naval bases, deter future port visits by the U.S. Navy?
It's especially difficult at the moment. You have a return of the United States Sixth Fleet to heavier duty in the Mediterranean Sea, and Israel is a beneficiary of that. Before 2017, the last U.S. aircraft carrier to dock in Haifa Harbor was in 2000. So for 17 years, there were no U.S. aircraft carriers in Haifa Harbor. Now you have U.S. ships in Ashdod, U.S. ships in Haifa. If a Chinese company takes over the management and the running and construction of port facilities in Israel, the U.S. Sixth Fleet is going to have to take that into account. Given how the United States feels at the moment about Chinese espionage, I suspect it will deter them from coming to Israeli ports.
Shoshana Bryan, thanks so much for your insights.